mind, it always helps to come back and take notes for um, topics. So I'll just put them here so that oops, sorry. Ask Onkon Corroy to try to join again. Somebody asked him because he was trying to join, and whenever I try to write in the message and somebody tries to join, and then the, that person gets kicked out. So yeah, there he is. Okay, so title and critical appreciation. Sorry, appreciation. Okay, these two will be questions of 10 marks from the short story. This short story is shorter than the last one, and we will go line by line with this short story too. Okay, so I hope you have this on your screen. In case you don't, I will share it so that we can all be on the same page. And I keep forgetting that I can also turn on captions so that since this is getting recorded, even the captions would get recorded, and whatever we say can be later formatted into a kind of response to the particular topic. Okay, so I'll just turn on the captions. Okay, all right. So yeah, it's happening. I don't know if you can see the. Can you guys see the captions? Or is it just me who can see them? Well,
See, sir.
yeah.
We
Oh,
can
you
see.
can see. Okay, all right, great. So that will also reduce the number of confusions that we might have because of my pronunciation or something. All right, that's great. So let's go into the text, and we know that Chekov was a Russian writer, modernist, if not modern, one of the pioneers of short stories, uh, and his short stories have been translated in almost uh, around 50 languages all over the world, and that makes us guess at the kind of impact that Chekhov has on the audience worldwide. Uh, so let's see what this misery is all about. To whom shall I tell my grief? Now, this is a direct reflection upon the title of the piece. I mean, in grief, we feel miserable, and misery and grief are complementary to each other. So, this seems to be a quotation, this seems to be a line from another poem or another short story, or maybe somebody is saying this, or it can also be a kind of an epigraph, like epigraphs are short uh, things written when somebody is beginning something, and of course this is the beginning of the short story, and we can take this quotation to be a kind of an epigraph. To whom shall I tell my grief? um, Grief itself is a problem, but when you do not have a person to share that grief with, the problem multiplies. We feel very lonely, we feel very um, drained when we cannot share our grief with someone. And being in trouble, being in grief is something, but to live with that grief alone is indeed miserable, and hence another reflection on the aspect of misery. So the twilight of evening, now this sets the tone of this sets the atmosphere of the story, relevant for our critical appreciation. uh, the atmosphere of a story, the atmosphere building of a story is often essential, and we can find that this is the twilight of evening, and twilight usually brings into our mind associations of loneliness, pain, sadness. We remember this. We can remember. We can talk about this song even in the discussion of the topic about this song from Anand, where I think Kishore Kumar sings about this impending twilight, this impending darkness. I believe it was from Anand, but I will not hazard to sing, of course, but I'm trying to remember the lyrics. Kahin dur jab din dhal jaye. And for me, it was one of the saddest tunes, saddest songs, and sweetest that I had heard. Even when I was a kid, I understood that this is going to be sad. Uh, I really did not understand why they were sad or what happened, but now I do. And that twilight or evening is a is often considered, is often projected as a site of sadness, as a time of sadness, as a time of retrospection, introspection, because the daily labor, the day's work is done by evening, and we have free time on our hands. And we all know from our experiences that even after we um, switch off our mobile phones for the night, if sleep is elusive, if sleep does not come easily, then we have a lot of time to make ourselves sad by thinking about whatever has happened till now, and how people misbehaved with us or who betrayed us, and so on and so forth. So, and we can also bring into reference that famous romantic pre-romantic poem Elegy Written in a Country Churchyard, because in the very beginning of that poem also we find the onset of evening, the onset of darkness, the prelude of darkness. Darkness is associated with grief, and darkness is associated with loneliness. Big flakes of wet snow are whirling lazily about the street lamps, which have just been lighted, and lying in a thin, soft layer on roofs, horses' backs, shoulders, caps. Snow has been personified here. In the colder regions of the world, I mean, snow might be a very welcome thing for people like us living in this tropical hell. Snow might be very welcome, very wholesome for us, but for people living in the colder regions of the world, in the tundra region, especially in Russia, cold snow is not something that they really want to see every day, because they see it every day. And when it becomes wet, it becomes really a problem. And they were whirling, making these circleish elliptical movement around the street lamps, which have just been lighted. So imagine I can imagine these flakes of snow as white moths attracted to light. And here is an antithetical image. Here is an image of sadness also. Can somebody tell me why am I saying that if the snow is like whirling round lazily around the lighted lamps, then there is some kind of a, you know, hint of sadness, or there's a hint of even misery here. Anyone?
Hello, sir. Hello.
Yes, Hong yes.
Snow is often associated with lifelessness, paleness.
Okay.
That's why it may be a symbol of death.
Okay. But the fact that the lamps have been lighted, so there is warmth, there is light, as opposed to the evening darkness. So I am saying that the wet snow or the flakes of the snow are encircling or whirling round the just lighted lamps. There is a image, there is a suggestion of sadness, there is a suggestion of, if you can say, pain, or there is a suggestion of despondency, there is a suggestion of hopelessness. Why? Anyone else other than Anton would like to try? The word that came out is like Hong Kong, not Hong Kong. Sorry. And stupid uh, Google Meet. Anyone would? I mean, it's a contrastive image. It's an image of contrast, and this can go a very long way in establishing the critical appreciation that you are going to write of the story. Like, this is a beautiful image. This is a beautiful uh, contrastive, paradoxical image that is being created. Lighted lamps versus wet snow, or flakes of snow whirling round uh, the lighted lamps. Would anybody try, or should I talk about the way I interpret the situation? Well, why am I saying this is a contrastive image? Because, on one hand, as Onkon pointed out, that the snow is cold and hence it is associated with the images of death. But on the other hand, the lamps that are lighted, remember, in those days, the lamp was not really an electric lamp, not our tridents, but those lamps were like gaslit, and they did provide a small way of warmth to maybe insects. But just like, if you remember, if you have read Keats's Ode to a Nightingale, Keats presents in front of us an image where a flower blooms, where a rose blooms, and no sooner has it bloomed, flies come swarming around it. uh, I believe, if we can compare the light of the lamp to be a flower, these flakes of cold have come swarming around it, whirling around it, in order to cover it, in order to extinguish it, because the light and the warmth are antithetical or um, opposite of this wet snow. Okay. But the snow is further, the image of the snow is further developed as being lying in a thin soft layer on roofs, horses' backs, shoulders, caps, wherever it can find a place, the snow has uh, deposited itself. Iona Potapov, that's a funny name. Anyway, Iona Potapov, the sledge driver, is all white like a ghost. Uh, Iona Potapov is a sledge driver and is covered with the white snow, and hence looks like a ghost, which is usually considered to be white. Now that is interesting. Why is a ghost usually imagined in popular imagination to be white? This is uh, this is interesting. I mean, when we think about it, why are all ghosts so white? There could be two reasons for that, but let me hear from you what you have to think about this. Whiteness of the ghosts, like we see in our ghost movies and stuff, that they are wearing white clothes and stuff, like in Scooby Doo. Anybody would like to hazard a guess? Devaprasad? Anyone else? Well, I think there are two reasons responsible for this. First is that when you're a ghost, all blood is drained from your body and you become pale. So that is why, you know, ghosts can be white. Secondly, if ghosts need to be seen in the backdrop of darkness, then they better be white. মানে যদি সাদা না হতো তাহলে ভূতরা তো অন্ধকারে বেরোয়, তাহলে অন্ধকারে ওদের সাদা মানে ওদের অ্যাপিয়ারেন্সটা আর আমরা বুঝতে পারতাম। বাট আই বিলিভ দ্য বেস্ট ঘোস্টস আর দোজ হুম উই ডু নট সি। ওকে, just give me a minute. the living body can be bent. So maybe he is feeling cold, and that's why he is like uh, gathering himself into a kind of a ball. If a regular snowdrift fell on him, it seems as though even then he would not think it necessary to shake it off. So he is thinking that, or the writer Chekov is thinking that snowdrift, if there was a steady flow of snow on him, then he would not have had thought it necessary to shake it off, because maybe he is already wet. So no matter how much water or no matter how much snow falls on him now, this is not going to make any difference anymore. So he's not thinking that it should be, he should shake, or he should scrape off the snow from his, off his body. His little mare is white and motionless too. So the mare that he was driving is also white, full of snow, and motionless like him. So a kind of a parallel thing that we see between a man and his beast. Her stillness, the angularity of her lines, and the stick like straightness of her legs make her look like a halfpenny gingerbread horse. So, this is the description of the horse, that the mare is still, and she is standing in a kind of a 90-degree line, and her she's standing straight like a stick, and somebody might consider her to be a halfpenny gingerbread horse, a kind of a horse made out of bread which has straight uh, lines. She is probably lost in thought. Anyone who has been torn away from the plough, from the familiar grey landscapes, and cast into this cloud full of monstrous lights, of unceasing uproar and hurrying people, is bound to think. Chekov is guessing that the horse, the mare, might be thinking. The horse is thinking something. Why is she thinking? Because she has been torn away from the plough. So she was earlier a plough animal. She was earlier a farm animal. She used to live in a farm. And she had this grey familiar landscapes of her farm. Now she is cast into a slough, like this carrier, this carriage drive. And the city where this carriage is driven is full of monstrous lights. To a village person, especially to a village animal, um, lots of lights in the city could appear to be very disorienting, and hence this adjective of monstrous has been associated, has been put in front of the word lights, monstrous lights, of unceasing uproar. There is always some rustle and bustle going on in the city as opposed to the country life, and people are always hurrying. So anybody who is brought from the country, brought from the farm into the city life, will be lost in thought, will be reminiscing about the glorious countryside that that person is familiar with. And here is an opportunity for another critical thought about the story, that it glorifies um, the country life, the farm life, the agriculture over the busy schedules of the city life. It is a long time since Iona and his nag have budged. So they were standing there for a very long time. They came out of the yard before dinner time, and not a single fare yet. So they have been here for a long time. It is not even time for dinner, but they have not been able to get a single passenger. Now, business is bad, the snow is falling, it's evening, a sense of despondency, a sense of futility is oozing out of this situation. And it is also paradoxical about the image of the mayor and the stasis that in which they are in, like they have not budged, they have not moved, is that they, I mean, the horse is supposed to be a swift animal, and ironically, now the horse is just standing there, doing nothing. But now the shades of evening are falling on the town. The pale light of the street lamps changed to a vivid color, and the bustle of the street grows noisier. But now there is hope that since the evening is really coming upon the town, and the pale light, which was pale during the daytime, which was pale in the twilight, has now changed into vivid color, because the ironically the street lamps would become more bright in the night, and gradually there are more and more people coming in, and there is lots of noise, there is lots of hustle and bustle going on. Sledge to Vyborgskaya. Okay, these spellings would someday break my teeth. Vyborg, Vyborgskaya. Okay, sledge to Vyborgskaya. Iona hears sledge. So somebody might be calling on him, and Iona could only hear sledge, not to Vyborgskaya, which might be a place. Iona starts, and through his snow-plastered eyelashes sees an officer in a military overcoat with a hood over his head. So Iona is rudely interrupted in his thought, and even snow had plastered his eyelashes, and he can see an officer in a military overcoat with a hood to protect himself from the snow. To Vyborgskaya, repeats the officer, are you asleep? To Vyborgskaya. In a token of assent, Iona gives a tug at the reins, which sends cakes of snow flying from the horse's back and shoulders. The officer gets into the sludge driver clicks to the horse, cranes his neck like a swan, rises in his seat, and more from habit than necessity, brandishes his whip. The mare cranes his neck too, crooks her side stick-like legs, and hesitatingly sets off. So now, after reading through a few two paragraphs, we see some kind of an activity. Some short stories are notoriously lacking in any kind of action, but we have been indulged in thought, we have been indulged in the atmosphere building, but now some action is taking place, and Iona is giving a tug at the reins. The horse is moving ahead, and officer gets into it, new things start happening, and even when there was no necessity to brandish his whip, Iona does it, and the mare uh, goes ahead and starts the journey away from thought. Now this becomes an activity rather than thinking. Where are you shoving, you devil? Iona immediately hears shouts from the dark mass, shifting to and fro before him. Where the devil are you going? Keep to the right. So, as is usual on streets, there could be rude people, and there could be competitive vehicles that could bar your way or that wants to get you away from the street, or makes these kinds of exchanges that maybe he was shoving, he was rubbing with some another, rubbing the carriage or the sledge with another sledge, and that other sledge said that, why are you shoving me, you devil? And um, the dark mass shifting to and fro. So maybe somebody was driving another sledge and or a carriage, and they were wearing some dark clothes. So they were moving from right to left in quickly, so that he could only make that it was a kind of a dark mass that was shifting to and fro before him. And the dark mass ordered the Iona to keep to. You don't know how to drive, keep to the right, says the officer angrily. So the officer also agreed with the uh, dark mass, and said that you should keep to the right because you might not know how to drive. I understand that I lost the connection for a time, so sorry for that. Um, so the officer also agrees with the the other driver in front of Ion. A coachman driving a carriage swears at him. A pedestrian crossing the road and brushing the horse's nose with his shoulder looks at him angrily and shakes the snow off his sleeve. Iona fidgets on the box as though he were sitting on thorns, jerks his elbows and turns his eyes about like one possessed, as though he did not know where
Hello,
he was. Yeah, hello?
hello. যে
Yes?
আপনার অডিওতে ডিস্টার্ব শোনা যাচ্ছে না আমাকে।
Is that only Onkon, or everyone else cannot hear me?
আমার মনে হয় না আমার কেউই পাচ্ছে না।
না স্যার শুনতে পাচ্ছি না বলতে সাহায্য করুন।
এখন?
এখন শোনা যাচ্ছে,
এখন
একটু আগে
শুনতে পাচ্ছি।
মাঝে মাঝে
হ্যাঁ,
কথা।
মধ্যিখানে মধ্যিখানে ইয়ে হয়ে গেছিল, ডিসকানেকশন হয়ে গেছিল, মানে এটা তো রিলে হয়, দেরি করে যায়, তো পরের কথাগুলো হয়তো শুনতে পাওনি। So we are only like on the road along with Iona, and everybody is showing hostility towards this sledge driver because a coachman swears at him, a pedestrian crossing the road brushes against the horse's nose and has snow deposited on his sleeve. And Iona is not very confident today. Some days, even the most easy things, some days, even the most obvious things of our occupation or our life becomes a little more difficult because something has already happened inside a person's mind, something has already been wrong in a person's life, and we are not ourselves that day, and things go wrong, especially if we are dealing with public. So he appeared as if his eyes were like as if he was possessed, and he was not sure why he was there or what he was doing there. What rascals they all are, says the officer jocosely. They are simply doing their best to run up against you or fall under the horse's feet. They must be doing it on purpose. So the officer is making fun of Iona and saying that they don't know how to walk, or they don't know how to cross the street, and you are doing nothing wrong, but it is these people who are deliberately trying to put you off balance, or they are trying to make your life miserable by deliberately coming in front of you. So he is making fun of Iona. Iona looks at his fare and moves his lips. Apparently, he means to say something, but nothing comes but a sniff. What? Inquires the officer. So he can't even speak because I think one of the reasons as to why he cannot speak is because the cold actually makes the muscles on the face stiff, and if you are trying to speak after a long time, then your muscles do not really work in that manner and you cannot speak. And all he could do was to sniff, like kind of a noise he could make, like a horse. And the officer could not hear what he was saying, and so he said that, what were you saying, what? Iona gives a wry smile and, straining his throat, brings out huskily, my son died this week, sir. So this is what is harassing Iona. This is what is making his life miserable. Uh, but what is what makes this line more pathetic is that Iona is giving a wry smile. He's smiling and saying, you know, my son died this week. Uh, as paradoxical as it may sound, a smile in this situation hints at a greater pain than all the tears in the world can. So the son is dead this week, and he is back to drive the sledge so that he can have enough to eat. What did he die of? Iona turns his whole body round to his fare and says, who can tell? It must have been from fever. He lay 3 days in the hospital and then he died. God's will. So, when he thought that the passenger was interested to hear what he had to say about his son, then Iona turned his whole body. He found that he should be more attentive to the passenger than to the sledge on the road or to his horse. And he said that no one can know, no one knows what actually happened, and it must have been from fever. He had fever, and he was there in the hospital for 3 days, and then he died. God's will. God wanted him dead, so he's dead. Nobody knows why he died. It could have been fever. Um, this is, I mean, Chekov is known to bring out the pathetic situation, or rather the miserable situation of the poor in Russia. Nobody cared about the poor people, nobody cared about how they lived and how they died, whether they got enough food or not. And the apathy of the authorities, the apathy of the people who could bring a change into the life of the poor, percolates into the poor people themselves. They stop caring themselves. Like, I mean, they don't give much thought about the death of their own people unless and until their own stomachs are full. And hence the poor father has come out to drive a sledge only after a week of his son's death. Turn around, you devil, comes out of the darkness. Have you gone cracked, you old dog? Look where you are going. So I said that since he has turned his whole body towards the passenger, he is not looking at the street or whatever is going on over there, and somebody curses him that where are you going? Like, are you gone crazy? And old dog, look where you're going. Drive on, says the officer. We shan't get there till tomorrow. Going on like this, hurry up. So he says that, okay, fine, let's not chit chat and do your job. Let's drive, because otherwise, if we go on the slow pace, we will never get there. So this is strange that on one hand, if he is going so slow, then how come people manage to get in front of him? Or if he is going so slow, as according to the officer, then how come he is getting into trouble? Because if he goes slow, he might not bump into other people. The sledge driver cranes his neck again, rises in his seat, and with heavy grace swings his whip. Several times he looks round at the officer, but the latter keeps his eyes shut and is apparently declined to listen. Putting his fare down at Vyborgskaya, Iona stops by a restaurant and again sits huddled up on the box. Again the wet snow paints him and his horse white. 1 hour passes, then another. So he wants to talk to the passenger. He gets motivated by the curses and the officer's hurry, and he wants to talk to the officer, but the officer makes no um, sign that he's interested in small talk with the sledge driver. And he reaches Vyborgskaya, and he stops at a restaurant, then again comes back, sits on the box, and the same image is repeated. So it's a regular thing that is going on right now, and 1 hour, 2 hour passes before anything happens. Three young men, two tall and thin, and one short and hunchbacked, came up, railing at each other and loudly stamping on the pavement with their goloshes. I think goloshes means boots. I don't know. So now the three different people are here, and they could be the new passengers for Iona. And like young men, they are tall, they are thin, and one is short and hunchbacked, and they are making a lot of noise and with their stamping with their boots. They are showing a lot of energy. Cabby, to the police bridge, the hunchback cries in a cracked voice. The three of us, 20 kopecks. So they want to go to police bridge, or a place called police bridge, and they want the three of them to get onto the sledge, and they will pay 20 kopecks. Kopecks seems to be the currency of the place in Russia. Iona tugs at the reins and clicks to his horse. 20 kopecks is not a fair price, but he has no thoughts for that. Whether it is a ruble or whether it is 5 kopecks does not matter to him now, so long as he has a fare. So even when the price is not really very fair, just give me a. Okay, sorry for that. So he he just wants to move. He just wants to work, and it does not matter to him if it's a ruble or whether it's 5 kopecks. As he has fare, I mean, something is better than nothing. Give me a minute. Somebody wants to join in? Okay. So the three young men, shoving each other and using bad language, go up to the sledge, and all three try to sit down at once. The question remains to be settled: which are to sit down and which one is to stand. After a long altercation, ill temper, and abuse, they come to the conclusion that the hunchback must stand because he is the shortest. So in a sledge, I don't know exactly what kind of a conveyance, what kind of a transport this sledge is and how it operates. So all of them want to sit, but there is space for like two to sit and one to stand. So they have an altercation, they fight amongst each other, and ultimately it is the hunchback who is made to stand, because not maybe because he's the shortest, but because he's the hunchback. So that is how the dispute is settled. Well, drive on, says the hunchback in his cracked voice, settling himself and breathing down Iona's neck. Cut along. What a cap you have got, my friend. You wouldn't find a worse one in all Petersburg. So the hunchback is now ordering him about and making fun of Iona's cap. He says that this is the worst one in all Petersburg, and even if you give money to find an uglier cap, that it could not be found. And his friends are laughing, and so is Iona. It's nothing to boast of. Yeah, I have a poor cap. I'm a poor man. I have a bad cap with me, so I am not boasting that I have a good cap. That's what he's saying. Well then, nothing to boast of. Drive on. Are you going to drive like this all the way, eh? Shall I give you one in the neck? So, making fun of him, bullying him, the hunchback says that you have nothing to boast of. Just drive. And if you are you going to drive like this, like maybe slowly all the way, and should I like hit you on the neck so that to make you move a little fast? My head aches, says one of the tall ones. At the uh, Duck Masov's yesterday, Vaska and I drank four bottles of brandy between us. So that's why his head is aching, because he has drunk a lot of liquor, he has drunk a lot of brandy, one of the tall boys. I can't make out why you talk such stuff, says the other tall one angrily. You lie like a brute. So the other person is not very convinced that about whatever the other person was saying about his head aching and drinking four bottles of brandy between him and someone else. Strike me dead, it's truth. It's about as true as that louse cuffs. So the other person is defending that no, he has a headache and he has drunk these four bottles of brandy, which is a kind of a boasting thing for young people, because they often boast on the fact that they boast on the issue of um, how much can one drink, how much one has drunk, so on and so forth. So taking another pot shot, making fun of the driver once more. Um, Another tall person, another one of them, saying that it's as true as the louse that a louse coughs. Louse lice. They do not cough. They are not known to be coughing. I mean, I have never heard a lice উকুনকে কাশতে তো কোনোদিনও কেউ শোনেনি বা দেখেনি. So your word is as true as a cough which has never been heard by anyone is. So Iona is happy. Iona is listening to all of this and he is grinning, and he thinks that these gentlemen who are not very gentle are merry. They are happy. Who? The devil take you, cries the hunchback indignantly. Will you get on, you old plague, or won't you? Is that the way to drive? Give her one with the whip, hang it all, give it her well. So the hunchback is not very happy with the way in which the sledge is being driven, and maybe he wants it to go faster, and he is making him whip the poor horse. Iona feels behind his back the jolting person and quivering voice of the hunchback. He bears abused address to him. He sees people, and the feeling of loneliness begins, little by little, to be less heavy on his heart. The hunchback swears at him till he chokes over some elaborately whimsical string of epithets and is overpowered by his cough. His tall companions begin talking of a certain Nadezhda Petrovna. Iona looks round at them, waiting till there is a brief pause. He looks round once more and says, "This week, my son died." So while they were busy in whatever they were doing, and the hunchback was calling names at the poor at poor Iona, but soon the hunchback himself was caught in his own string of epithets, like bad words that he was using, and he started coughing. On the other hand, the other people were talking about somebody called some Nazhiedza Petrovna, maybe some girl that they were talking about. And in order to tell the grief, as we found in the epigraph, that to whom should I tell my grief, um, Iona wants to talk about the loss that he suffered in the form of the death of his son. "We shall all die," says the hunchback with a sigh, wiping his lips after coughing. "Come on, drive on, drive on. My friends, I simply cannot stand crawling like this. When will we get there?" So, without paying much attention to the seriousness or the depth of the pain, the hunchback says that we will all die one day or another. So it's okay that your son is dead, and he is complaining to the friends that if and that the sledge is not driven at the maximum speed or at the optimum speed, and hence it will take a very long time for them to reach wherever they are going, to the police bridge, and he has to stand. So that is why he is projecting, that is why he is shifting his discomfiture onto Iona. Well, you give him a little encouragement on the neck. So the friends ask the hunchback to hit the driver on the neck so that he fastens the stride of the animal. "Do you hear, you old plague? I'll make you smart. If one stands on ceremony with fellows like you, one may as well walk. Do you hear, you old dragon? Or don't you care a hang what we say?" So this hunchback is continuing his abuse on Iona and says that I'll make you smart, I'll hit you, and it's better to walk than to ride your sledge. And he's calling him a dragon, and he's saying that don't you even care what I'm saying? Because Iona is not responding to the abuses of that particular person, so he thinks that he is ignoring him. And Iona hears rather than feels a slap on the back of his neck. So after 2 or 3 threats, actually they slap the driver. Hey, hey. He laughs. "Merry gentlemen, God give you health." Now this makes us feel more bad for the driver, because if the driver had stopped the sledge and would have whipped the hunchback or these people, or would have abused them, cursed them, we would have thought that they got what they deserved. But this person is rather smiling, laughing, and actually wishing good health to these boys. "Cabman, are you married?" asks one of the tall ones. "I? Hey, hey. Merry gentlemen, the only wife for me now is the damp earth. He ho ho. The grave, that is. Here my son's dead and I'm alive. It's a strange thing. Death has come in at the wrong door. Instead of coming for me, it went for my son." So when he has been asked a question that whether he is married or not, he is simply saying that the earth is going to be his wife, that grave is going to be his wife, where he is going to get eternal rest, final rest, because the wrong person has been taken by the death, that is his son. It was not his time to die, and yet he is dead. And he should have been dead, but his son is dead. And this cruelty, this cruel world, is one of the main themes of Chekhov's writing. There is a pathetic strain that goes on in uh, Chekhov's short stories. There is always some very pathetic thing going on in as far as Chekhov's stories are concerned. And Iona turns round to tell them how his son died, but at that point, the hunchback gives a faint sigh and announces that, thank God, they have arrived at last. After taking his 20 kopecks, Iona gazes for a long time while the revelers, who disappear into a dark entry. Again he is alone, and again there is a silence for him. The misery which has been for a brief space eased comes back again and tears his heart more cruelly than ever. With a look of anxiety and suffering, Iona's eyes stray restlessly among the crowds, moving to and fro on both sides of the street. Can he not find among those thousands someone who will listen to him? But the crowds flit by, heedless of him and his misery. His misery is immense, beyond all bounds. If Iona's heart were to burst and his misery to flow out, it would flood the whole world, it seems. But yet it is not seen. It has found a hiding place in such an insignificant shell that one would not have found it with a candle by daylight. Um, Now we understand why Iona was happy with having a fair. It was not because he had come out, and as I initially thought that there was some financial consideration going on here, that at least some uh, fare is better than having no fare at all. But I think there is something more pathetic here. A fare would mean, passengers would mean somebody to talk to. And having no fare, having no passengers would mean that there will be loneliness for him. And that is what this paragraph brings to the highlight, that uh, there is no one to talk to. He wants to find someone in the crowd. And our sense of loneliness is highlighted more when we stay within, or when we are in the company of a large number of people. I mean, it is in the crowds that our loneliness becomes the greatest. Because we cannot talk even when we find that there are so many people around us, and yet we cannot speak, yet we cannot talk about our pain, our misery, our sadness. And there's a beautiful metaphor. Now this is relevant for critical appreciation of the story. The beautiful metaphor is that there's a lot of misery, unseen, invisible misery, and if his heart were to burst and all the misery were to come out, then the entire world would be flooded. And yet nobody can see the misery that holds that is being held in an insignificant place, like a poor man's heart. The poor man's heart is the most insignificant place of all, of everything. Like, no, nothing can be more insignificant than a poor man's heart is. Iona sees a horse house porter with a parcel and makes up his mind to address him. What time will it be, friend? He asks, going on for 10. Why have you stopped here? Drive on. Iona drives a few paces away, bends himself double, and gives himself up to his misery. He feels it no good to appeal to people, but before 5 minutes have passed, he draws up himself, shakes his head as though he feels a sharp pain, and tugs at the reins. He can bear it no longer. So he wants to talk to a house porter who has a parcel and asks him about the time. He simply mentions the time and asks him to drive on, like not to park in front of a house or something. He drives on, he goes a few paces ahead, and then he gives himself up to misery once more. I mean, there's a constant passenger on this sledge, and that is Iona's misery. And Iona cannot shake off this passenger easily, and this passenger has only pain as payment to be given to the sledge driver. But after before 5 minutes have crossed, he shakes his head and he thinks that enough is enough. Let's go back. Let's. He cannot bear it any longer, and maybe he wants to go back to his house. Back to the yard, he thinks, to the yard. A little and his little mare, as though she knew his thoughts, falls to trotting. An hour and a half later, Iona is sitting by a big dirty stove. On the stove, on the floor, and on the benches are people snoring. The air is full of smells and stuffiness. Iona looks at the sleeping figures, scratches himself, and regrets that he has come home so early. So the horse is happy that finally they are going home, because the snow was maybe the s- the snow was uncomfortable. The cold was he was the mayor was feeling uncomfortable in the cold and the snow, and that's why she starts to trot. Trotting is a kind of a happy movement as opposed to trudging. So 1.5 hour later, they are in their home in front of a big dirty stove. So they are warming themselves up. So even on the stove, on the floor, on the benches, there are many people who are sleeping. So maybe it's a kind of a common house, or maybe a kind of a uh, resting place for the drivers. And the air is full of smells and stuffiness. And this is classic Chekov for you. Pain, sadness, misery, snow, death, darkness, smell, stuffiness. This is the world of Chekov, and there is no escape from it. It's like a you know something that sticks to your mind. Um, and then he regrets that why has he come home so early? What is he going to do? Uh, because everyone else is sleeping and he maybe is not feeling sleepy, and there's nothing else for him to do right now. I have not earned enough to pay for the oats even, he thinks. That's why I am so miserable. A man who knows how to do his work, who has had enough to eat, and whose horse has enough to eat, is always at ease. So he thinks that he has not earned enough for the day, and not even enough for oats for his horse. And he understands, he thinks that he is miserable because he does not know how to do his job, and therefore he cannot have enough to eat, and therefore he cannot have enough for his horse to eat. But a person who knows his job, who understands how to do a job, uh, can earn enough, can manage to earn enough not only for himself but for his horse, and that will make a person self-content. And if anything otherwise happens, as in the case of Ionite happens, that they will be miserable. In the corners In one of the corners, a young cabman gets up, clears his throat sleepily, and makes for the water bucket. Want a drink? Iona asks him. Seems so. May do you good, but my son is dead, mate. Do you hear? This week in the hospital, it's a queer business. So in a corner, a young cabman gets up and tries to like goes for a water bucket, and Iona is stating the obvious that do you want to drink water, and and the person states, yeah, it seems so. I mean, like, why else would I go towards the water bucket? And thinking that this person could hear his misery, could hear his grief, he thinks that he has got an audience. He says this, that my son is dead, and may good happen to you, but my son is dead, and this had been a very bad business. This had been a very sad thing that has happened. Iona looks to see the effect produced by his words, but he sees nothing. The young man has covered his head over and is already asleep. The man shies and scratches himself, just as the young man had been thirsty for water. He thirsts for speech. Now, I believe this line is significant. So, as we pointed out, as I think I pointed out earlier, that to be miserable, to be sad, is miserable enough, but to be miserable and alone is worse. If you are sad and you do not have any other person to share your sadness with, then life becomes truly, really problematic, truly, really miserable. His son will soon have been dead a week, and he has not really talked to anybody yet. So, this also hints at a greater or a more it hints at the fact that when you have some kind of a trauma, talking exorcises that trauma a lot. Many psychologists believe in this principle, and they allow the patient, or they encourage the patient to talk, because with by talking, by saying something about one's life, one's problems, one person can feel lighter. And here too, um, he wants to talk, and he has not talked with anyone at length. He wants to talk of it properly with deliberation. He wants to tell how his son was taken ill, how he suffered, and what he said before he died, how he died. He wants to describe the funeral and how he went to the hospital to get his son's clothes. He still has his daughter Anis, Anicia in the country, and he wants to talk about her too. Yes, he has plenty to talk about now. His listener ought to shy and exclaim and lament. It would be even better to talk to women, though they are silly creatures, they blubber at the first word. The intense desire for speech, the thirst for speech, the desire to describe one's grief is immense. And I believe this person wants to become healthy, and hence want to talk about the entire process through which he went, going to the hospital, how the son got the fever, and how he suffered, and how what he did. And he also wants to talk about his only daughter, and he thinks that talking to a woman would always help, because women are more empathetic, though they are silly creatures, and they would like crying at the first word, overacting maybe. Um, these these words hit differently uh, when we realize that, I mean, there, I mean, uh, there would be many friends, there would be many people who would really like to hear our grief, because maybe we are young, maybe we are, I mean, not you are young, you are young, and many people would like to hear about you, like your poems and however you express yourselves. But old people, old uh, men, do not really have people to listen to them. And I I am reminded of these people in the uh, madhouse of the last short story, that maybe they too wanted an audience. They wanted to show what was going on, or whatever was happening to Poe. I think so. I think it was one of the cases where they allowed Poe to enter the asylum so that they could have an audience. And the same thing is true with this person also. He just wants to talk, but the misery of the situation is this, that nobody has time to even listen to the poor man talk. Let's go out and have a look at nature. Iona thinks there is always time for sleep. You will have sleep enough, no fear. So he's talking to himself now. He says that let's go out and have a look at the nature, and there will always be time to sleep. Nature is often a good listener. In fact, one of the best listeners is nature, because you can talk to a tree for forever, for hours, and the tree will not say that enough of your bullshit. So he goes out. He puts on his coat and goes into the stables where his mare is standing. He thinks about oats, about hay, about the weather. He cannot think about his son when he is alone. To talk about him with someone is possible, but to think of him and picture him is insufferable anguish. So when he is alone, he does not think about his son, but he wants to talk about his son to other people, because if he starts thinking about his people when he is alone, it will become rather unbearable for him. So I cannot fathom the pain that is oozing out of this short story. Like, it will really depress us to read this story, to discuss this story, especially in a overcast day like this. But this is what it is. We are stuck with misery, and I hope we can feel the misery of the situation. Are you munching? Iona asks his mare, seeing her shining eyes. There, munch away, munch away. Since we have not earned enough for oats, we will eat hay. Yes, I have grown too old to drive. My son ought to be driving, not I. He was a real cabman. He ought to have lived. So he is now talking to the mare, and he thinks he sees the mare munching on hay, maybe munching on, I don't know what the horse has got. And he's saying that, okay, since we do not have oats, we have to eat hay, and I have grown too old to drive. My son should have been driving, not me, because I cannot drive anymore. I do not have the ability to drive. He was a real cabman, and that is why he was making those faults. He was not sure which side to ride, because his son was the real cabman, and his son perhaps drove the mare and the sledge, and he did not do that earlier. Maybe he was working in the farm. And this is the legacy of the son. This is what the son has got from the father. Sorry, this is what the father has got from the son. It is usually the opposite way. It's usually the other way around, that the son will inherit something from the father, but here the father has inherited a sledge from his dead son. He ought to have lived. Iona is silent for a while and then he goes on. That's how it is, old girl. Kuzma, Ionitek is gone. Ionitic is gone. He said goodbye to me. He went and died for no reason. Now suppose you had a little colt and you were own mother to that little colt, and all at once that same little colt went and died. You'd be sorry, wouldn't you? His name, the name of the son is Kuzma or Kuzma, and he's dead. And he is comparing. He is asking the mayor if she would have had a son, a colt, and the colt would have had died, and you too would have had felt sorry. I mean, of course, the colt would have had, the mayor would have had felt sorry, but through the colt, through the horse, maybe Iona is talking to us that what if you lose someone whom you love, and wouldn't you be sorry? I mean, by stating the obvious, on one hand, we can find the simplicity of Iona, that he states very simple things. There is no complexity in the expression of his sadness, and this is what makes the misery, this is what makes the sadness grow on us, because this is so very elemental, this is so very simple. He's not even crying, he's just saying a few things which seems to be beyond measurable depth of sadness. The little mare munches, listens, and breathes on her master's hands. Iona is carried away and tells her all about it. Well, at least there is one redemption in this suffocating story. Ultimately, I think Iona has found an audience in the form of the little mare. The little mare munches and listens and breathes on her master's hands, and this gesture by the mare makes Iona lose his tongue, and he starts to talk about his son, how he died and whatever happened. And perhaps with that he found an audience, perhaps with that he could give a vent to his pain, to his sadness. Just a few notes that say a few things about wherever, whatever is which we could have had found out anyway. So that's it with the short story, and as I said that this is a much shorter text than the earlier one was. If you have any questions, if you have anything that you would like to talk about the earlier text also, we can do, or we can put an end to the class today. I do not want to start the poems right now. We will talk about the poems in our next classes. Any questions, anything, any doubts, anything that you would like to talk about? Okay, alright, so you may leave the meeting for today, and we hope to meet soon.